The candle that never burns out. The eerie spark. I never intended to set foot in that godforsaken place. Yet the crypt called to me like a faint whisper in the middle of a quiet night. My name? It hardly matters now. What matters is that I have seen the face of my future killer, and nothing can wash that sight from my mind. It began as a curiosity. Someone at a local tavern spoke of an ancient tomb lost in the woods beyond the old cemetery. Legends claimed an everlasting flame burned in the depths of that forgotten resting place. The thought consumed me until I could no longer resist. Armed with nothing more than a flashlight, a worn satchel of supplies, and my own naive courage, I set out to prove the tale either true or false. From the moment I touched the crypt's iron gate, a chill coursed through my veins. The entrance was heavy, the hinges groaning in protest. A stale odor greeted me, like the breath of centuries past. I could almost taste the dust, that thick, suffocating essence of forgotten things. My flashlight's feeble beam flickered, suggesting I turn back. But I was determined, too intrigued by the possibility of an eternal candle. Could it be real? Did it defy the laws of nature? Or was it merely the stuff of local legend? As I descended the creaking steps into the crypt's depths, I noticed something. A faint glow at the far end of the corridor. It was no reflection of my flashlight. It was another source of light, a small flicker piercing the gloom. My heart thumped so loudly that I could barely hear my own footsteps. And in that moment, the stories rang true in my head. There was indeed a candle that never burns out. I wish I had turned and run the other way. A whisper of dread. Entering the main chamber felt like stepping into someone's mausoleum. All broken pillars and dusty statues. Shadows clung to the walls like secrets never meant to be shared. Even the stale air pressed against my lungs in defiance of my intrusion. My flashlight revealed rows of old coffins perched on stone ledges, lids warped from time and neglect. It was a resting place for the forgotten, those whose names had been swallowed by history. At the center of the crypt stood a small altar of polished black marble, and atop it, a single white candle flickered. Its flame pulsed softly, amber and gold, yet somehow cold at its edges. It didn't sputter or wane, no matter how the drafts flowed across that open chamber. I found myself drawn toward it, as though my eyes were compelled to fixate on that mesmerizing glow. A strange hush settled over me. My surroundings, once creaking and shifting, grew silent, as if waiting. I approached with hesitant steps, each footfall echoing in that hollow place. An urge to stare deeper into the flame tugged at my mind. Something about its brightness was unnatural, hypnotic. The stories must have been true. It did not seem to melt away, nor did the wick ever shorten. The closer I got, the louder my pulse became. A bizarre mixture of awe and anxiety took hold of me. I felt like an intruder at a sacred ritual. I forced myself to look away for a moment, but curiosity overrode caution. I gazed again into the candle's heart, and I swear I heard it whisper my name. Had I known what was to come, perhaps I would have left right then. The first glimpse. Something changed the instant I stared too long at the flame. My mind felt as though it had been yanked into a dream or a nightmare. I didn't notice the crypt's walls anymore. All I saw was endless darkness around that one spot of light. Then, without warning, a face emerged in the glow. It wasn't my own reflection. It was someone else entirely. A stranger, wreathed in twisted shadows. The face was as vivid as if this man stood right before me. I couldn't place his features exactly. Rough skin, cold eyes, and a cruel twist at the corner of his lips. He looked older than me, but not by much. The expression he wore reminded me of a predator studying his next meal. My stomach clenched. I felt no immediate recognition, but a voice inside me insisted I would meet him eventually. Something primal told me this wasn't just any face. It was the face of my executioner. Anxiety swelled within my chest, choking me. My flashlight clattered to the stone floor, and the echo brought me back to reality. I stepped backward, my eyes tearing away from the candle's flame. Cold sweat drenched my forehead. I could still see that haunting visage imprinted in my mind. Had the candle shown me the impossible truth of my own future? A wave of revulsion and terror set my legs shaking. Even then, I struggled to rationalize what I had just witnessed. Maybe it was an optical illusion, the product of exhaustion or an overactive imagination. But doubt gnawed at me, and a sickening sense of dread took root. Was that truly my future killer? Voices in the dark. The candle's bizarre revelation tormented me, but I didn't leave. A part of me wanted to run screaming out of that crypt, yet another part yearned to confront the truth of it. Foolishly, I ventured deeper into the ancient corridors surrounding the central chamber, hoping for answers. The passageways branched in multiple directions, each leading to cramped rooms filled with more coffins and funeral urns. I noticed unearthly carvings on the walls, symbols and sigils that I couldn't decipher. They glowed faintly in the darkness, as if the candle's power extended to every inch of this underground maze. With each step, I began hearing whispers, though I was sure I was alone. They spoke in hushed tones, indistinct words that coiled in my ears like serpents. The more I strained to listen, the more they faded, always dancing on the edge of my perception. My flashlight's beam seemed weaker here, as if the gloom itself was devouring the light. Shadows leapt and twisted at the corners of my vision. Then I heard it, a distinct scrape of stone, like a heavy object being dragged across the floor. Every hair on my neck bristled. Had someone or something followed me? I followed the noise against my better judgment, stumbling into a small alcove. The walls were etched with bizarre depictions of figures kneeling before a candle. The hush was broken by another scraping sound, closer this time. I froze, pressing myself against the cold stone, heart hammering. Then silence. When I finally emerged from that alcove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The crypt itself felt alive, and the candle's presence pulsed in the back of my mind, beckoning me to return. A nightmarish reunion. Deciding I'd had enough for one excursion, I retraced my steps to the entrance, determined to leave the crypt behind. But the path seemed longer, more winding than when I first arrived. The air felt denser, as though the walls were pressing in on me. By the time I reached the top of the steps, my body was drenched in sweat, my mind swirling with confusion. I spilled out into the old graveyard and let the cool night breeze kiss my skin. Relief flooded me for a moment. As I turned to look back, I caught sight of the crypt's entrance, seemingly set deeper into the earth than before, as if it were sinking under the weight of its own secrets. I forced myself to walk away, but that face in the flame haunted my every step. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, my future killer. He wore that same predatory expression, and sometimes, in my dreams, he spoke my name in a jagged whisper. I woke repeatedly in a panic, my throat dry and my heart pounding. Morning brought no solace. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked haggard, my eyes bloodshot from lack of rest. The events of the previous night clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Foolishly, I tried to confide in a close friend, Travis. He laughed it off initially, an old wives' tale, some local myth told to spook travelers. But when he saw the desperation in my eyes, he grew serious. I realized nothing would dispel the dread unless I found answers. That crypt was a Pandora's box I had opened, and its curse had already begun to fester in my mind. The curse unfolds. Days passed and the face lingered. It seeped into my consciousness during the quiet moments. Washing dishes, taking a shower, even reading a book. I'd look up to find my mind playing tricks on me, as though the man's reflection stood behind me. I could almost feel his breath on my neck. My nerves were shredded. I found myself jumping at the slightest sound. A door creak, a phone ringing, or the wind against the windows. Whenever I tried to convince myself it was mere imagination, a voice in the back of my head whispered that the candle had revealed a truth I couldn't escape. I recognized a creeping dread that my future was bound to this stranger's grim design. And that knowledge started eating at my sanity. My appetite vanished. Sleep turned into a battleground of night terrors. The moment I drifted off, I'd be back in the crypt, the candle's flame calling out to me, filling my dreams with cryptic visions. The stranger's face, twisted corridors, and myself, trapped in an endless loop of fear. I awoke each time drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Travis tried to help me cope. We spent hours discussing ways to confront my growing paranoia, but nothing changed. I realized the only place that might hold answers was the crypt itself. Perhaps if I returned, I could extinguish the candle or break whatever curse it cast. Determined, yet terrified, I resolved to go back, not alone this time. Travis, reluctant but loyal, agreed to accompany me to see if there was some logical explanation. I wish I could say I was hopeful, but the gnawing dread in my stomach told me otherwise. Returned to the depths, Travis and I set out at dusk. Neither of us wanted to confront that place in the stark light of day. Somehow it felt less real when cloaked in darkness, as though stepping into a parallel world. The trek through the old cemetery was unnerving. Headstones jutted from the earth at odd angles, and the wind carried the faint scent of decay. At last, we arrived at the crypt. The iron gate was ajar as I'd left it, but now it gave me the impression of a mouth, waiting hungrily. Travis shot me a nervous glance. "We don't have to do this," he said, but I had no choice. This candle had infected my life, and I needed a cure. Our flashlights illuminated the stone steps as we descended. The same stale odor greeted us, accompanied by an undercurrent of dread that made my skin crawl. Travis, ordinarily composed, looked pale, his jaw clenched in unease. When we reached the main chamber, the candle was there as if it had never been disturbed. Its flame flickered steadily, illuminating the altar with that cold glow. I felt its invisible pull once again, a gentle tug on my consciousness. Travis approached the candle, eyes narrowing. "It's not melting," he said in disbelief, echoing my own initial thoughts. I warned him not to stare too deeply into its flame, though I feared it might be too late. Still, we pressed on, investigating every inch of the crypt, searching for some mechanism or hidden trick. But no matter where we looked, we found nothing that could explain the eternal candle. Ultimately, our attention circled back to it, that unwavering flame. My heart pounded as I approached, remembering the face. The question gnawed at my mind. Would Travis see it, too? If he looked, Travis gazes into the fire. Against my warnings, Travis leaned over the altar. "If there's something to see, I might as well see it," he muttered, half in challenge, half in curiosity. My heart raced, but I couldn't stop him. For a tense moment, he just stared. The flame danced in his eyes, and I saw his features shift from skepticism to alarm. Suddenly, Travis let out a strangled gasp and recoiled, stumbling backward into one of the broken pillars. He clutched his chest like someone who just narrowly dodged a mortal wound. His flashlight fell to the ground, flickering across the cracked stones. I rushed to him, fear grabbing hold of my lungs. His face was pale, eyes wide with terror. "Did you see it?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. He nodded, struggling to form words. "I saw someone. I don't know who, but he couldn't finish." I knew precisely what he had witnessed. Panic swelled, and Travis began pacing erratically. "This isn't real," he kept muttering. "There has to be an explanation." But deep down, I suspected there wasn't one, not a rational one. We both felt it, the crypt's oppressive energy, and the faint sense of a presence watching us. The candle's flame flickered innocently, as though mocking our fear. Realizing we'd find no comfort here, we made our way back to the surface. Our footsteps on the stone stairs sounded like drumbeats in my ears. Travis wouldn't speak a word until we were outside. Once we stepped into the moonlight, he inhaled sharply. "I need some air. I can't breathe down there." Looking back at the crypt, I had the unnerving suspicion it wanted us to return again. Shared madness. Both of us carried the same burden now, haunted by the images we'd seen. Travis went home that night looking as though he'd aged years in the span of hours. I tried to reassure myself that we would find a way to stop it. But the following days proved worse than I could have imagined. Travis and I both experienced nightmares that left us trembling and drenched in sweat. We'd see fleeting apparitions in our peripheral vision. The phone would ring, yet no one answered. We'd hear our names whispered in lonely hallways when we were certain no one else was there. As we compared experiences, it was eerily similar. A relentless sense that someone was coming for us. The face I had seen was not the same face Travis described, meaning each of us had glimpsed a different threat. The crypt, it seemed, tailored its curse to each visitor. Our friendship strained under the weight of constant anxiety. Neither of us wanted to be alone, yet being together only reminded us of that candle's power. We turned to every resource we could find: old manuscripts, local folklore, even obscure occult references, but found nothing about a candle that never burns out, except cryptic mentions of a cursed flame in half-forgotten legends. I questioned my grip on reality. Perhaps I was losing my mind, dragging Travis down with me. But the illusions and sensations were too vivid, too tangible. Something real was at work here, something beyond our comprehension. And as much as we tried to deny it, one fact rang true. The crypt had shown each of us the face of our killer. The knowledge alone felt like a death sentence. The descent into obsession. Desperation took hold, and I became obsessed with preventing the fate foretold by the candle. I quit my job, unable to focus on anything except unraveling the crypt's mystery. My apartment turned into a chaotic nest of scattered books, half-eaten meals, and sleepless nights. Travis, initially more grounded, soon followed my downward spiral. He spoke less and less, as though the candle's vision gnawed away at his spirit. Dark circles framed his eyes, and he drank heavily just to stave off the nightmares. We were losing ourselves in the labyrinth of fear. Despite the danger, I knew we had to return. If we left the candle intact, it would continue tormenting us. And who knew how many others might stumble upon it? The thought of more people suffering the same fate was unbearable. I contacted Travis and proposed a final mission. We would destroy the crypt and the candle at any cost. He agreed without hesitation. "I can't live like this," he whispered, voice trembling. There was a fragility to his gaze that made me wonder if his sanity was already teetering on the edge. But I was in no position to judge, for I, too, felt the cracks in my own mental armor. We prepared for days, gathering tools, rope, lanterns, and whatever else we thought might help us demolish or seal the crypt. Some part of me suspected a mere sledgehammer wouldn't be enough, but I clung to the hope that brute force might triumph over the unnatural. Secrets unearthed. Under the cover of a moonless night, we returned, hearts pounding. This time, we carried more than flashlights. We had a crowbar, a hammer, and a collection of accelerants, though the idea of setting a fire underground made my stomach churn. Above all, we were driven by desperation. Inside, the crypt seemed to have shifted again. Hallways were narrower, doorways misaligned. The candle's glow guided us through the labyrinth until we found ourselves back in the central chamber. There it was, unstirred, unwavering. That flame, the heart of this place. Before we made our move, Travis spotted something etched into the altar's surface. By leaning in with our flashlights, we discovered elaborate carvings that depicted a ritual. Hooded figures surrounded a candle, their faces contorted in devotion or terror. At the center stood a robed figure holding a dagger, and below him were words in a language we couldn't read. The entire altar seemed like a testament to some ancient sacrificial rite. We exchanged uneasy glances. "We have to do it," I muttered, forcing courage into my voice. With trembling hands, I raised the crowbar, aiming to tip the candle off the altar. As soon as the metal touched it, a wave of cold shot up my arm, like plunging my hand into icy water. My vision blurred, and I nearly dropped the tool. Travis rushed to help, but he, too, recoiled as though shocked. It was as if the candle's very presence was resisting us. Despair washed over me. How could we destroy something that refused to be touched by physical means? The altar's defense. Determined not to give up, Travis poured accelerant around the altar, careful not to let the fumes overwhelm us in the enclosed space. I pulled out a lighter, my hand shaking. If the candle claimed to burn eternally, maybe conventional fire was worthless, but we had to try. The moment the lighter sparked, the flame on the candle flared unnaturally bright, illuminating the entire crypt in an eerie glow. The walls glistened, revealing more of those strange symbols carved into every surface. It was as though the place itself was alive and angry. A violent wind whipped through the chamber, knocking us off balance. The lighter's tiny flame flickered out. Travis swore as he was shoved back by an unseen force. A deep groan reverberated through the stone corridors, and I felt something akin to a tremor beneath my feet. I managed to reignite the lighter, struggling against the gust that threatened to extinguish it. The accelerant caught, flames dancing around the altar in a chaotic swirl. Yet the candle's flame stood unharmed in the midst of the inferno. We watched in horror as the fire slowly receded, as if it were being sucked into the candle's flicker. When the chamber dimmed once more, the candle remained, unscathed. Even the black marble beneath it bore no scorch marks. All that burned was our hope. Panting and terrified, Travis and I realized we had no power over this ancient, malevolent object. The crypt rumbled again, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Something told me we had overstayed our welcome. A terrifying escape. A loud crack echoed from above, and pieces of the ceiling began to crumble. The stone archways threatened to collapse, sending echoes of destruction through the corridors. Travis pulled me back from a falling chunk of rock just in time. We exchanged a single, panicked glance and ran for the exit. As we dashed through the corridors, the flickering lights of our flashlights bounced off the walls, revealing fleeting shapes that seemed to reach out at us. The crypt roared like a wounded beast, the floors vibrating beneath us. I was sure we wouldn't make it out alive. Dust choked the air, stinging our eyes and throats. We coughed and stumbled, desperate to find the path that led back to the staircase. At one intersection, Travis froze, pointing into the gloom. I followed his gaze and saw a figure standing in the darkness, a silhouette of a person. The face was invisible, but it radiated menace. Without hesitation, we turned the other way, refusing to confront whatever horror lurked there. Our lungs burned by the time we reached the steps. We scrambled up, panting and covered in grime. The crypt's interior groaned once more, as if lamenting our escape, but it didn't collapse fully. We burst out into the night air, hearts pounding, lungs aching. Once outside, we fell to our knees on the cold grass, retching and gasping for breath. I glanced back at the crypt's entrance. It stood silent and still, as if mocking us. We had failed to destroy the candle, and it would continue to burn, forever. Haunted reverberations. We returned to our homes broken. Though our bodies escaped the crypt, our minds remained ensnared by its relentless curse. Each night, the nightmares intensified. Each day, every shadow seemed to hold the promise of violent death. The knowledge of our impending killers loomed over us like an executioner's blade. Travis isolated himself, refusing to answer calls or messages. My attempts to visit him ended with me pounding on a locked door. I'd hear movement inside, but no response. In my own apartment, I could hardly bear to turn off the lights. The darkness was too thick, too alive. Rumors spread around town. People whispered that something strange was happening in the old cemetery. A few even claimed they heard screams echoing from the crypt at night. I wondered if the candle called to others, tempting them to gaze upon its flame. As the days crawled by, I realized that simply waiting for the inevitable was worse than any physical torment. My mind replayed the face I had seen, dissecting every detail. The cold eyes, the grim smirk. I tried to imagine how it would happen. Would he stab me in a crowded place or corner me in my own home? Would I see him coming, or would it be sudden? The crypt's secret had hollowed me out, leaving me a shell of a person. I grew desperate for a solution, any solution, that might end this torment. The stranger in town. One evening, while nursing a cup of coffee I could barely taste, I saw someone new in the diner across the street. He looked vaguely familiar, and a chill raced down my spine. The angles of his face. Could it be? I pressed closer to the window, every nerve on edge. Though I couldn't be certain from that distance, the resemblance to the man in my vision was enough to make me tremble. I felt compelled to confront him. My fear of the unknown had become too suffocating. If this was indeed the man, perhaps I could reason with him or change whatever destiny the candle had foretold. I mustered the last fragments of my courage, grabbed my coat, and went outside. Approaching him in the diner felt surreal, like stepping into a dream. My pulse thundered in my ears as I neared his table. He looked up from his meal, and our eyes locked. My breath caught in my throat. It was him. Every detail matched the face I had seen in the candle's flame. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" he asked. Polite confusion writ across his features. I stammered. I thought you were someone else." My words fell flat. My heart hammered so violently that I feared it would burst. The man shrugged and returned to his meal, leaving me awkwardly standing there. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something. His coat was caked in dried mud, the kind you'd get from wandering old, overgrown places, and his gaze lingered on me a fraction longer than it should have. A flicker of recognition, maybe? Or was it just my paranoia? I fled, my mind spinning. Was he truly the man from the crypt's vision? Or was my fear manifesting false alarms? Revelations of blood. Days later, the local news buzzed about a gruesome discovery. A body found near the old cemetery. The victim was stabbed repeatedly, the attack savage and personal. My stomach churned when I heard the details. An unshakable thought pounded in my head. Is this the work of the stranger I saw? I reached out to Travis, fearing for his safety. My calls went unanswered. Anxiety coiled tight in my chest. Something was terribly wrong. I drove to his place, each mile feeling heavier than the last. The moment I stepped into his dimly lit apartment, I knew something was off. Travis sat in the dark, the flicker of the television casting eerie shadows. Empty bottles littered the floor, and the smell of stale liquor hung in the air. When I flicked on a lamp, I nearly recoiled. His eyes were sunken, his face gaunt. He looked at me with a blank stare, as if he was already halfway gone. He spoke in a hoarse whisper, "I can't take it anymore. I see him in every reflection." I didn't have to ask who. The candle's curse had corroded his mind. Before I could comfort him, he grabbed my arm, nails digging into my flesh. "I won't let it happen," he hissed, as if he had some plan. "I have to stop him before he stops me." My heart ached for my friend, but I also recognized the mania in his eyes. I pleaded with Travis not to do anything rash, but he wrenched away, stumbling. Then he started to laugh, low, humorless, desperate. I realized he was too far gone for simple words to help. The final plunge. That night I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed at an ungodly hour. Travis. His voice on the line was frantic. "I'm going back," he shouted, sounding more unhinged than ever. "Back to the crypt. I'm ending this once and for all." The call ended abruptly. My blood ran cold. The crypt had become our personal hell, and now Travis was planning to confront it alone, in his fragile state. I raced to my car, adrenaline fueling me. The drive was a blur, headlights piercing the darkness of abandoned roads. The old cemetery loomed ahead, oppressive and silent under a clouded sky. The crypt's iron gate was open, a single flashlight beam bobbing in the depths. That had to be Travis. I sprinted down the steps, nearly slipping on the damp stone. Panic guided me through the corridors, the narrow beam of my flashlight revealing the crypt's familiar dread. Then I heard Travis's voice echoing from the main chamber, tinged with fury and despair. "Show yourself," he roared. The voice that came next was not his alone. It was layered, twisted, as though multiple voices spoke in unison. When I finally reached the chamber, I found Travis standing before the altar, the candle's flame swaying unnaturally. His eyes were wide, tears streaming down his cheeks. He clutched a rusted blade in one trembling hand. A rift in reality. A howling wind circled the altar, though we stood in an underground chamber. The candle's flame stretched upward, forming shapes that defied logic, like ghastly faces twisting in the light. The crypt trembled under some immense, unseen power. I tried calling out to Travis, begging him to step away, but he was transfixed, staring into the flame. His words came out in raspy gasps. I see him. All the time, the madness in his voice was palpable, thick with despair. He raised the blade over the candle, as though to strike it down. A deafening roar reverberated through the crypt. The walls seemed to warp and twist, the symbols carved into them glowing with malevolent energy. For a split second, I swore I saw outlines of robed figures from centuries past, chanting silently as they encircled us. My flashlight flickered, threatening to plunge us into total darkness. Travis brought the blade down with a frenzied scream. The moment metal touched the flame, a blinding flash erupted, forcing me to shield my eyes. A shockwave hurled me backward, pain lancing through my body as I collided with a stone pillar. My vision blurred, ears ringing. When the light subsided, I saw Travis sprawled on the floor, knife clattering out of his reach. The candle still burned, unwavering, its flame whispering ancient secrets to the shadows. I wanted to scream, to cry, but no sound escaped my lips. Facing the inevitable, struggling to my feet, I crawled over to Travis. His eyes flickered open, but they were vacant. Blood trickled from a cut on his temple. He forced a weak smile that sent a jolt of sorrow through me. "It won't let us go," he rasped, the words barely audible. Gently, I cradled his head, tears burning in my eyes. It felt as if the entire chamber was closing in, chanting with voiceless malice. The candle's glow danced mockingly. Despite everything, it remained eternal, an impossible beacon of doom. As my vision cleared, I noticed a form standing in the archway, the silhouette of a man. My throat tightened. His features were shrouded in darkness, but I recognized the shape of his face, the face I had seen in the flame. Something in me snapped. All the terror I'd endured coalesced into a single moment of furious resolve. If this was the man destined to kill me, I would not die cowering. I stood, the crowbar lying a few feet away. My hands shook as I gripped the metal, brandishing it like a desperate shield. A single thought blazed in my mind: change the future or die trying. A light without end. The figure stepped closer, each footstep echoing on the stone floor. My pulse thundered in my ears. The crypt seemed to pulsate, alive with ancient energies. I raised the crowbar, preparing for a fight I was certain I would lose. Behind me, Travis moaned in pain, reminding me that time was running out for both of us. Then the man spoke, voice cold and detached. "You've seen me, haven't you?" Fear spiked in my veins. He knew. The candle had shown me his face, and now he had come to complete the prophecy. We clashed in a whirlwind of metal and flesh. My desperation fueled each swing, but he evaded with supernatural swiftness. The crypt's gloom made it hard to see. Our shadows stretched eerily under the candle's unwavering light. At one point, I felt cold steel slice my arm. A cry escaped me. Warm blood trickled down, staining the stone floor. The final blow never came. In a move of blind luck, I bashed the crowbar into his shoulder. He stumbled, slipping on the slick floor. I lunged to press my advantage, but the ground trembled violently, forcing us apart. Large chunks of the ceiling collapsed, kicking up clouds of dust. The crypt convulsed like a living thing in its death throes. Seizing the moment, I grabbed Travis by the collar, half dragging him across the crumbling floor. The stranger rose, but found himself blocked by a massive fallen slab. Our gazes locked for an instant. I saw pure hatred in his eyes, but I also saw fear. The crypt was claiming him, burying him beneath centuries of darkness. With a final burst of strength, I pulled Travis through the corridor as everything collapsed around us. We emerged into the open air, the crypt's entrance collapsing behind us with a thunderous roar. The dust settled, and the only sound was our ragged breathing. The eternal candle was entombed once more, hidden beneath untold tons of stone. For a fleeting moment, relief bathed over me. But as Travis and I stumbled away under the pale moonlight, a thought struck me like a dagger of ice. Was the candle truly gone, or would it continue burning in the darkness, waiting for the next soul to uncover its terrible secret? I'll never know if the killer survived, or if the crypt's collapse was enough to seal away the curse. In my nightmares, I still see that face, and I feel the candles flicker dancing across my eyelids. Perhaps one day, another foolish wanderer will enter those buried halls, drawn by the promise of an eternal flame, and learn, as we did, that some lights are better left unlit. Even now, I can sense it, the candle that never burns out.